Nice. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, folks. Welcome back to another office hours. I'm super excited to kick off our first office hours for the year. We're continuing with a bit of a Max 9 focus for the next few weeks, and then we'll probably get back to our usual broadcasts featuring users and folks that you suggest to us that you'd like to hear from. I'm very excited today to have Cycling 74 engineer John MacCallum. John, welcome. John headed up the OSC Everywhere Integrated OSC feature that's in Max 9. It's really quite incredible. I've been able to spend a bit of personal time with it, and it's really something. I'm still also grokking its full capabilities, and we're hoping that today, with the help of John, we can demystify it a little more and all of us can start to enjoy OSC everywhere. John, welcome to Office Hours.
All right, thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. So I'm happy to be here. This is a feature I've been really excited about. It's something that I've wanted personally for a long time in Max, and I'm super happy to have been able to be a part of making it happen. I want to do a tour of it, talk about how to get it set up, what you can do with it, some of the limitations, and then we can open it up for questions and discussion. We can chat about it. And I'm super interested to hear from people about, what uses they might have of it, and, where they might like to see things go. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Uh, yep. All right. Um, it is specifically OSC for the control of parameters in Max. So it doesn't control everything in Max. It doesn't control every object, but it's really targeted at objects that have parameters. And so I just want to make sure that, I know that some people maybe aren't familiar with parameters. So just bear with me while I take a couple of minutes to kind of go through what those are and how they work. So most graphical objects in Max, like for example, live.gain, or the float object, or multi-slider, not the message box. These objects all have what's called a parameter in them. And a parameter is basically just like a representation of the kind of quintessential value of these objects. You can find out if an object has a parameter by selecting it and going into the inspector, going down to the bottom and looking for a section called parameter. And in the case of these two objects, there's an option to turn it on. So these objects have parameters, but they're not enabled by default. So when I flip that on, a parameter gets created for each of those two objects and gets kind of installed into the parameter subsystem. I can go into under the view menu. I can go down and choose parameters and see a table of all of the ones that are there for this particular patch, for the patch that was frontmost when I chose that item. And you can see that they have more than just representation of the kind of main value of an object. They have also a unique name, they have a range, they have a unit, and a number of other things. So it's basically this that we can control with Open Sound Control in Max. And these parameters are used throughout the system. The main use for them is basically automation, modulation, saving of storing data. So like the pattern system uses them, the snapshot system uses them, and it's one of the ways that Max and Live communicate with each other. So again, this is how we control. This is what we can control with OSC and Max in the current implementation. And so let me do a little demo of how this works. So I've got Touch OSC over here on the right. You can imagine that this is running on my phone. I'm just going to run it from the computer so that I don't have to hold the phone up to the camera. But this could be running on a remote machine or whatever. And so I've got these two faders, and in the patch, I'm just going to replicate the same like basic structure or whatever. So I'll use a live.dial for the rotary thing. Okay, like that. So you notice whenever I make something new that has a parameter, I can see the names of these things. And in Touch OSC, in a very similar way, each of these widgets also has a name. So you can see kind of down here, these are the names of the three things that are in that window: fader one, fader two, and radial one. Those were given by default, just as these were generated by default in the parameter system in Max. And so the deal is that these have to match, and it doesn't matter what you do to make them match, but they have to match. So you can edit them in Touch OSC, or you could edit them in Max. I'm going to edit them in Max. So I'm going to change live.gain tilde to be fader one. So I can just type this in here, fader one. I'm going to change this one to fader two, and I'm going to change this one to radial one. Cool. And now that that's done, I can go ahead and start this up, and I should be able to control my patch from Touch OSC, which is pretty cool. And it works the other way too. If I lock the window, it works the other way. So there we go. So it's bi-directional. And I think for me, the thing that's cool is that there's no extra patching. There's no extra objects. If you have the system set up in the right way, you basically get, this kind of behavior for free in the background. So the way that you set this up is by going into the global preferences. And now down here, there's a new section called OSC. And there are a bunch of different options. We'll focus on just the top ones for now. So the first couple of them let you set the IP address and the port that you want Max to send parameter-related OSC information to, and then the port that you want Max to listen on for parameter automation over OSC. In Touch OSC, you have a similar configuration window, and in pretty much every OSC system system that supports OSC, you've got something like this that lets you set the IP address to send information to and the port to receive on. So it's pretty much the same thing. The deal is that you want those ports to be swapped, right? So the port that Max sends to should be the port that Touch OSC receives on, and vice versa. And so once you've got that set up, you are good to go. And everything more or less should just work. So you can inspect the data that Touch OSC is sending into Max by just using a regular UDP receive object. So we're sending to port 30338. And if I just hook up a message box, I can see what this data looks like. And I go over here. There it is. So fader one and some value, fader two and some value, and the radial one. So that's a way of kind of taking a look at things. You probably saw a preference in here, for example, receive OSC over UDP. If I switch that to off, it doesn't have any effect on these UDP receive objects. This is really for the kind of behind the scenes OSC system. So I'll switch that back on before I wonder why my patch doesn't work. So with Max 9, we got a couple of new objects related to OSC. One of them is param.osc. And this lets you have a little bit more fine-grained control kind of over the system instead of just relying on how it's configured to run in the background. So this will let you send information to objects and also to interrogate the current values of things. And another one called osc.codebox. And osc.codebox is basically a display for OSC. What it does is it takes an OSC packet and converts it into human readable JSON-like syntax. So without any arguments, if I just bang this param.osc object like this, I'll get the value of the last parameter that was updated, the most recently updated parameter. So if I change fader one and fader two and then bang this, I'll get fader two. I can add an attribute to this called auto. And once I've done that, it'll output automatically on every change to a parameter. Um, so this is, oh, and also it'll let you send OSC like max messages um, to this object that will dispatch them as if they had um, you know shown up on over UDP. So if I do that, that'll set the radial to 0 and um, fader 1 to 0 also. So one of the things that param.osc will let you do is have more kind of fine-grained control over how the OSC dispatching and stuff works. So for example, I could go into the preferences and turn off the global UDP stuff and then go back over here and just connect this UDP receive directly to param OSC. And then this basically still works in this direction. And similarly, when I change this, param.osc is reporting these values, but they're not being sent over UDP because I turned it off in the preferences. So I could make a UDP send object that sends to touch OSC. So you can kind of imagine that, like, in the background, this is basically what's going on if you have everything set up to run in the kind of normal way. So there's basically a kind of hidden UDP receive, hidden UDP send connected to something like a param.osc object that's doing the dispatching.
Wow, that's super cool, John. I love it.
Thanks. Awesome. Yeah. Yeah, I'm excited about it. So let's see. Let's maybe go to a slightly more complicated. Oh wait, sorry. Before we move on, there are a couple of other. There's one more attribute in param.osc that is useful. So this output mode is normally set to param, and like I said, when you do anything, you get the most recently updated value. If you set it to all params, you get the entire thing. You get all of the parameters that are present in your patch. And if you set it to info, you get basically more or less what you see in the table here, but encoded as OSC and, something that you can operate on in your patch, or that you could, for example, send to a remote host and have it build an interface for the parameters that are in your patch.
Wow.
So those are the two new objects. Let's switch over to a slightly more um, uh, complicated demo. So this one demonstrates a little bit about how you might build up a kind of more rich address space for your patch and address different parts of it. So what I've got is the same three objects, exactly like before with the same names. And I also have them in an abstraction that I've loaded into two different B patchers. And so these B patchers, I've given a different argument to each one. So one of them is sub 1 and the other one is sub 2. And what I want is I want to be able to send a message. I want to be able to address the objects in those B patchers by prefixing the argument that I gave to those B patchers to the OSC address. So for example, sub 1 fader 1. So that's what I'd like the address of this live.gain to be. So the way that I've done that is I've gone into the B. Let's open this up and look at it. So what I've done is I've taken each one of these objects and I've gone to the inspector and down to the parameter section, and I've checked this option linked to scripting name. And what that does is it links the name of the parameter to the scripting name. So one of the limitations of parameters is that you can't change the name programmatically from Max, but you can change the scripting name. So once you've made that link, I can change this using the var name message. This scripting name is actually the message is actually var name. And so what I do is I get that argument and I just make an OSC address by prepending whatever it was to the name that I want to give to that object. And then when I look up here at the parameters that are in this patch, I can see I've got fader one, fader two, and radial one like before, but then I also have these the same names with these prepended sub one and sub two. And so
John, just a
now,
note: people are really appreciating it when you zoom a little bit. Our resolution's a little low thanks to Discord today. Um,
ah,
but yeah, when you use
cool.
the little square zoomer, is appreciated.
I'll keep it up. I'll keep
Thanks,
it up.
mate.
Thanks for letting me know. So what I've done, so that's how I've created the address space that I want over here. What I've done over in Touch OSC is pretty similar. Let me pop out of here. And if I go to one of these, you notice I have these tabs sub one and sub two. Eh, if I click on one of these and go into to edit it, the way that I'm building the address here is by using the parent name, and the parent name is the name of that tab. So it's slash parent name slash name, where before it was just slash name. So when I hit go here, I can control the stuff in sub one. It should work. The stuff in sub one should work. And stuff in sub two should also work. But somehow it's, oh, did I change something? Oops. Uh, oh, yeah. So I knew I was going to do that. I turned UDP off. That's funny. I even have a note over here to myself to turn that back on. All
Turn it
right,
back
great.
on.
It's cool. I just lost a year of my life. It's still not working. Um, there it is. So this is sub one, and in sub two over here, for some reason it's gone, it's only going one direction, but I'm not going to worry too much about that right now. I get these both back on. Yeah. Okay. Um, what's cool about the use of a namespace like that is that I can also send, well, if this is actually working, I'm gonna re it's open again. Okay, so something had lost its mind. All right. Um, what's nice about using a hierarchy like this is that if I want to make a fader over here that targets, for example, all of the faders that are in sub patches, I could do that by using a pattern. So I could replace sub one by a star and or an asterisk. And so that asterisk there means match anything inside of that between those two slashes. I could also replace the fader one with a question, oh, with another star. I could put a star there, or if I know I only really want to match one character, I could put a question mark. And so that's what is being sent under this master tab. So this one fader is sending actually slash star slash fader question mark, and it'll control all of those sliders. And the same with this one. This is sending slash star slash radial question mark.
Oh, that's super cool.
Yeah, that's a really nice feature of OSC is the use of patterns and the kind of hierarchy like that. And just to take a look at it, uh, so this is the pattern that's coming from over here. Yeah, slash star slash fader question mark. And I just built that up in here uh, by yeah, writing it like this.
Very cool. Yeah, I
Um,
could see how that would be useful for a mixer or something where you've got individual levels, but then you want a global master main
exactly,
control.
totally.
Yeah, super
So
flexible.
yeah, so yeah, okay. So I'll just mention a couple more things real quick, and then we can switch over and hear from you folks and chat a little bit. So yeah, one other thing to mention is that we support OSC query. So there's a thing in the preferences here, enable OSC query server, and you can set the port that it's listening for connections on. And so then with you can point your browser at that port, and you get a basically a JSON object that contains pretty much everything that you can set or query or ask about with respect to this patch. So this is, you can kind of see like it's all, the whole namespace is broken up. So slash sub one slash sub one radial one, and then here's like the long name, short name, and so on. So you can use this, for example, to kind of query the capability, the OSC related capabilities of a patch, and then, for example, build up an interface or whatever automatically. Um, yeah, and to say a few more things about the preferences and the way that things are organized, there are a few things down here we haven't talked about, and maybe they'll come up later. But for the most part, the deal is that the preferences that are set here in the global preferences, apply to all patches that get opened in Max, but they
Mm.
can be overridden on a per patcher basis. So if you need different behavior, like in this particular patcher, you can open the inspector window, and if you type OSC, there's a whole OSC section, and you notice everything is set to app default, and all of the things that are here are pretty much replicas of what's in the main global preferences. So the idea is that these can then override whatever settings you've got there. And then furthermore, you can grab a single object, open the inspector, run down to the parameter section, and you'll notice that there are three OSC attributes: OSC name, whether it's enabled or not, and the value mode, which I didn't mention before. I'll say something about that in just a second. So you can change the name. You can disable this one, which makes it unavailable for being changed by OSC. Or, for example, if you only want to use it in a limited way, you could go here to the global preferences, uncheck OSC enabled default. So turn that off, and then go in here, and then you select the ones that you want to enable, and you just enable them only, something like that.
That makes it super flexible.
Yeah, so you could have like opt in or opt out, depending
Right,
on what you
right,
want.
right. And I can see where you'd want that too. Yeah, I
Yeah,
I wasn't strangely wasn't aware of the per patcher controls of the in the patch inspector. That's super useful to know. Um,
totally.
yeah.
Yeah, and then yeah, just to kind of wrap things up, I'll just point everybody at the documentation. So there's if you go into the main documentation user guide down towards the underneath parameters, there's an OSC section, and that goes through in detail everything that I've talked about and a few other things as well.
John, is the star asterisk options mentioned there in the
Good
doc?
question. If it's not,
Yeah,
it
someone
should
just
be
said it
added.
wasn't in the docs.
Good point. Thanks for mentioning that. I'm going to make a note.
Yeah, let's
Uh,
get that added because that's
yeah,
that's really cool.
totally. But that makes me think that um, I should also put the link to the Open Sound Control website.
All right, so a lot of the stuff that exists with the OSC open, website or the original
Yeah.
is integrated.
So the specification here is under spec 1.0. 1.1 wasn't really adopted so much by the community, but 1.0 is kind of the standard. So this is the reference, and unlike a lot of technical specifications, it's um, short and to the point and not so difficult to read. But here it does mention how the pattern matching should work. So, for example, here's the asterisk, the question mark that I mentioned, and so on.
Nice. I,
Uh,
I just dropped the link in the comment for everyone.
awesome, thank you. Yeah. So, yeah, good point. The pattern matching. Yeah, there's not much about open sound control as a protocol or as a format that's documented here. This is really more about the objects, but it could be expanded for sure to help folks get situated with OSC.
Wow, this is a huge change to Max 9. This is excellent. I can see this being useful in many scenarios, from performance to installation to, yeah, lighting. Um,
Definitely, definitely. The first, this first version of it is it's really meant to like make it easy to get something happening quickly. So,
right.
get the port set up, get your names right, and you're good to go. I think it also supports pretty well more complex scenarios, but it's still a new feature that's still developing. So,
Yeah, yeah. The beauty too is you can pick up an iPad for pretty cheap at a thrift store now, and yeah, run
and
run
you got yourself a controller,
run the old Touch OSC. Yeah, that's
right?
awesome.
Yeah.
Folks, we've got John here. Usually John is actually a Discord regular, but there's nothing like getting answers in real time. We do have a couple of questions here, but be sure to drop your questions in the chat. Someone asked here, what are some use cases for the range values of a parameter in the max parameter system? Does it limit incoming values to that range?
Right. Yeah, it does. I mean, basically what the range is useful for is again for like automating control between two different systems. So, if you think about Max running in live, for example, and you want to have some interaction between these things, live needs to be able to ask Max, like, what's the range of this thing?
Mm,
Or for example, if I have some patch like this and I look at the OSC query thing that I showed you, that's the way of being able to say, aha, there's a slider, but it's not set to the default values of -70 and 6. It's set to, minus 100 and 18 or whatever.
mm,
So it's a way of being able to express some of the limitations or some of the way that preferences have been set. But it does clip those values. So for example, if I go, I believe it does anyway, let's just check. So if I go here to fader one and change it to you know 18, now when I do this, it goes up to 18. So in that case, the min and max of the parameter are also correspond to the min and max of the object. So it can be a little tricky in thinking about parameters, the relationship of the parameter to the object that contains the parameter.
right. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Uh, Seagull is asking how much of an issue is UDP latency in Max. I don't know that there's a catch-all answer, but um,
Yeah. Inside of Max, it's not really an issue. You know, and it really is equivalent to having a UDP object sitting in Max connected to some other objects. So, like behind the scenes, there's the guts of a UDP object that's running, that's virtually connected to something else that does the dispatch. So there's no added latency that you wouldn't experience using UDP in Max.
mm.
I hope that answered the question. Did that answer the question?
I think so. And in following up, someone else has asked here, what about lengthy OSC messages? Say if you want to send a lot of data over just one OSC param.
Yeah, I don't know what I don't remember off the top of my head what we set the limit to. I mean, there is a limit of some sort, but it's big. And you can, it's meant to be, this is meant to work with patches that have many parameters that are sending lots and lots of data. So the real limit that you're going to hit is the packet size limit for UDP. You'll hit that before you hit some other limit.
Right, and I imagine there's some basic max patching we can whip together to check latency too for bigger messages,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and if you
And
notice anything out of the ordinary, definitely at me in
yeah,
Discord.
yeah, John's in the Discord and very receptive to chatting and having questions, folks. So you can always hit him up
For sure.
asynchronously.
For sure.
Looks like we've got a couple of more questions coming in here, but yeah, this just adds a whole new UI interface flexibility to Max that I mean OSC's been in Max for quite a while, but not in this level. And we've had UI and parameter objects for a long time, so it's so great to pull them in and uh, integrate the OSC directly into the object rather than needing to
Yeah.
patch a bunch of stuff around it.
Yeah, it's a good point that it has been there forever. I mean, the fact that a max message comes out of this object when OSC was sent to it, that goes back a long, long time.
Right, right. Yeah, it just for me somehow makes sense for it to be part of the objects inspector. Um, yeah, I really appreciate that. Xnor, our very own Alex Norman, has a question. Maybe I missed this, but is there something that maps the range of the parameter to the range of the touch OC
Ah,
UI element, or was that something you manually set up, or do you
yeah,
use normalized values?
I hand waved over that. Sorry. Thanks for catching that, Alex. So these, when I put them in the patch, they were -7. They were the normal values, -70 to
Default,
6.
yep.
Yeah, and so when I dropped, for example, this in there, I did edit this from -70 to 6. So I don't know if you can see that down there. There it is. But I
Nice.
put those values in. Yeah. So good point. You have the range also has to match.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good question.
Yeah. And you can do that either way. Like you could set these to a different range to match the values in Touch OSC or whatever. It doesn't matter. They just have to agree. That's one of the things about OSC that's kind of interesting. That's the open part of OSC is that the it's unlike MIDI. You can't just plug two things in and have them talk to each other. The two endpoints have to have some agreement about, what the names are, what the values are, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, but unlike MIDI, usually, sometimes with MIDI, one is the determines and the other one just has to follow, whereas
Right.
this is like flexible either end.
Totally.
Folks, great chance to ask John questions. Drop them in the chat and I'll bring it up with John here. If I wanted to implement non-linear ranges between Touch OSC and Max, does the OSC layer have any abilities for that, or would I need to implement it myself in Max?
Yeah, good question. You would have to implement it yourself in Max. I think that's something that people have asked about a number of times and would be interesting to explore. You have a couple of options for how to implement it in Max. One way would be, like I showed earlier, you basically turn off parts of the OSC system and do it manually, right? So you have these values now. You can do whatever you want with this value in Max. The other way to stay in OSC longer would be to use ODOT, which is a package in the package manager that is kind of a programming language for OSC.
So there's a couple of options for that. Uh, James, that should get you on your way.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice to explore, to look at what are like the basic things that people would want to do for different types of shapes of ramps and things like that, and make that easy to do. So.
Yeah, I should mention too, like this is John is continuing to work on this. So and he's very open to hearing your input as you all dive into this new world of OSC everywhere within Max. So don't
For sure.
hesitate to reach out to us. There's a few avenues, support, but also John's here in the Discord. Um, all right, folks.
Sure.
If there's no more questions, we might wrap up here. Otherwise, drop them in the chat. We got one more here. OSC docs refer to raw value versus normalized value.
Yeah.
How does this work?
Thanks for catching that. I meant to mention that and forgot. So right. The parameters have actually two types of values. One is the value that you see minus, so in this case, minus 70 to 6, or in this case, 0 to 127. But they also keep track of a normalized value. So for example, 0, so everything would be 0 to 1, and every parameter has that. So you can, if you go in here into the inspector and switch one of these things to the normalized value, instead of sending the values that you see, it'll send kind of the position of the slider from 0 to 1. So normally you probably want what's here, but there are some times when having the normalized value is useful.
That's a great question. I've always been aware of that raw value because you have that additional outlet on the
Yeah, right.
live dot UI objects.
Uh, this one, no, not that one. Yeah, that one.
Yeah,
That's it.
and the dial
So it's,
also, which is handy sometimes. I sometimes just use the raw value.
yeah.
Is that also integrate? Is there a raw value in Max's UI objects like dial, for example?
Um,
I don't think it's exposed though, right?
that's the thing, it's not exposed, right? So
Right.
yeah, exactly. So this is one of these objects that doesn't, where the parameter is off by default. So if you turn it on, now it's working. But yeah, you look in here and you see its value, whatever its value is,
Mm,
which is 65. So, but internally, every parameter has a zero, has a normalized 0 to 1 value. You just don't have a way of accessing it. But
right.
with the OSC system, that is in theory one way to access it.
Very cool. Okay. And Turnen is says here, I've always appreciated Touch Designer's ability to quickly visualize all incoming OSC messages like the trail, chop, or just as channels in any operator. Are there
Yeah.
any quick options in Max to visualize OSC without having to compose a complex network?
Right. Good. That's a great question. That's something I'm interested in and excited about. So right now, the only way to do it would be to use param.osc in a patch here and see and set it to all params mode, and you'd see like everything that is here. Or to connect a UDP receive to param.osc. It would be great. Like one of the things about OSC is that you might have a very complex system where lots of messages are arriving at different frequencies from different sources, and some of them are like coming in all the time, like a lot, really fast, and some of them are just coming in sporadically every once in a while. And those sporadic ones, because the displays are typically, updating so often because of the fast ones, you miss those slow ones. So there's
Mm,
some like really interesting UX design to like make a really nice OSC display. And I would like to see something like that for Max, whether it's a built-in or something that ends up in a package or whatever. It would be super useful. Yeah.
right. We've got a question here. Does it work in a Max for Live device inside Ableton Live? Just note that Max 9 is not the uh, integrated build inside of Live 12 right now, but
Right. It's not, yeah, it's not working at the moment. I believe the intention is that it would work. Yeah, I don't know what the time frame on that is, but at the moment it does not work.
Have you tested Max 9 with Live 12, John?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So Max 9, but the OSC feature once Max 9 is integrated, should be operational.
In live, no, I think it'll be switched off for the moment,
Ah, gotcha.
but yeah,
Gotcha.
I do imagine that a future release will have it. Yeah.
Yeah, I could see it being very useful for like local like messaging between different devices.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I don't
Um
know so for me, I don't know what the limitations on that will be and what the challenges will be
right, right,
to
right.
make that happen. So no promises about features or time frame on that, but it's certainly something that's being thought about. Yeah.
Yeah, totally understandable. Follow James has another question here. Follow up on live coding question. Can you send OSC messages to parameters via the new Max REPL?
No, but I like the way you're thinking. That sounds great.
Yeah, note that one down, John.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, no, that's actually a pretty cool idea, and I can see, I have seen a lot of live coding when people are coding and they're controlling other things, and I can see REPL, OSC, other pieces of software creating something pretty incredible. Yeah, great question. All right, folks. Any other questions for John while we've got him here on the line? Otherwise, we might wrap up here in a few minutes. John, this has been really awesome, mate. Thank you so much for spending your time to come and show us this incredible.
Absolutely a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, mate. This is a huge add-on to Max, and I can see a lot of people really diving in here and maybe starting to use OSC for the first time or expanding their current workflows. I personally just love that flexibility of being able to design your own interface that works for you rather than trying to take an old MIDI controller and make it work.
Totally.
Yeah, very cool. All right, folks, so I think we're going to wrap up here. There's no more questions coming in. Just a reminder, we have another session next Wednesday. I believe it's in early afternoon. We will have our very own Sam Tarakajan. Sam's going to come along and be showing us a lot of all the new documentation features in Max, which there is a lot. We have an entirely new overhauled Max documentation system, so getting information, learning about what's new in Max 9, new features is easier than ever, and Sam's going to come along and talk to us about that. Stay tuned for the invitation. Once again, thank you so much for coming, John, and we'll see you out there in the Discord, folks.
Right on.
John, stick around for a minute. I'll keep you on the line. Talk to you in a second.
Cool.
Bye, folks.